The numbers are more or less stabilizing, and it's a few minutes past 3. So I think we can begin, and then people will join us as they please.
Okay. Then I would like to say welcome to this webinar on how to organize virtual conferences. I'm Ingeborg Ammerud. I work at Inland Norway University of Applied Sciences, and I'm a colleague of Susan Nacy, who's one of the panelists today. And I will try to moderate the following panel discussion. So the first hour of the webinar will be a panel discussion with 5 conference conveners, all of whom have been responsible for the organization of physical conferences when the COVID-19 crisis struck. So rather than cancel or postpone their conferences, as many chose to do, these 5 brave people chose to make the transition from physical to digital conferences. And now we want to use this seminar to share our experiences to help enable others to organize and run their own virtual conferences. So now we are 80 people gathered here. More to come probably. But we are from all over the world, from the US, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Malaysia, Nigeria, all over Europe, also some from Norway. So welcome to you all. This seminar will consist of this panel discussion, followed by a Q&A and discussion session. And the format of the panel discussion is this webinar, where the audience members can see and hear the panelists, but cannot see each other or speak themselves. And then after an hour in this webinar, we will change rooms and move to a Zoom meeting room through a different link. You have all received this link, but we will share it again in the chat before we close this webinar. And here you will be able to turn on your camera and mic and actively participate with any questions or comments. And our tentative plan is to start all together as a group and then break up into smaller groups, so-called breakout rooms, each with one of the panel discussants, before we come together as a group again. And if you have any questions to a particular panelist, you will have the opportunity to talk to that person or just listen. It's your choice. So in the meantime, we encourage you to use the chat function in this webinar. Please share your comments with panelists and attendees so that everyone can see what you write. Your comments and questions there can help form our discussion, both in this webinar and in the following discussion session. The webinar is being recorded and will be closed captioned for the hard of hearing later. As you can see, we have a sign language interpreter with us in the panel. Only the panelists are recorded. Audience members are not recorded. And as you will experience, there are diverse conferences, different choices and different options. And there is really no one-size-fits-all solution. There can be loads of variety. But we do see 3 main themes that can be interesting for everyone to hear about. And that is how we will structure this webinar panel with 3 main themes, where the first one is about practicalities, how to organize such a conference really. Another main theme is about social and networking events, how to make interaction possible online. And a third main theme is about the future. How do we see this continuous development of online conferences? And a few concluding thoughts before we go into the other Zoom meeting, more interactive session. And in the panel, we have Beatrix Busse, Charlotte Taylor, Susan Nacy, Henry Tyne, and Bodo Winter. And I suggest that we start this webinar with an introduction round of our 5 panelists So why don't you give a brief introduction with your name, your conference, number of participants, and some brief relevant details. Why don't you start, Beatrix?
Hello, everybody. I'm Beatrix Busse from Cologne University. I organized the annual conference of the International Computer Archive of Modern and Medieval English, so the ICAME 41. That took place in May from the 20th to the 24th of May. And we had 165 delegates from 29 countries who then signed up even after we had taken the decision to go online. That decision was taken in March. So really when, we were told we are going to have the lockdown and, in the very high moment of the pandemic. So that will play a role for everything else I'll tell you about with regard to organization, with regard to technical stuff and so on. Yeah, and interestingly, the title of the conference was Language and Linguistics in a Complex World, the title chosen 2 years before. Well, I think I don't have to say anything more.
Great, thank you, Beatrice. Do you want to continue, Charlotte?
Of course. So I'm Charlotte Taylor. I organised the Corporate Discourse Conference. Very similar situation to Beatrix described. So we had already organised the conference, done the call for papers and told presenters if they'd been accepted. We decided in March the same, to go online rather than to cancel. And again, that affected everything else that came after that. We had about 300 participants from around 40 different countries. And in part, that was because of the decision to go online that, as we'll talk more about, it made it more accessible to people.
Thank you, Charlotte. Bodo, you want to continue?
My name is Bodo Winter. I'm from the University of Birmingham, and I was organizing the UK Cognitive Linguistics Conference together with Florent Perec and Marcus Perman. And we had about 550 participants in the end, and around 200 talks, which ended up being 9 parallel sessions actually that we had to run at the same time. And we found ourselves in exactly the same situation that Beatrix and Charlotte were in, which is that we originally organized a physical conference and then had to quickly move to a digital one.
Thank you, Bodo. Henry.
Hi, everyone. My name is Henry Tyne. I'm based at the University of Perpignan in the south of France. I organized the TALC, that's the Teaching and Language Corpora conference in July. And I'd actually been looking very closely at what some of the other conferences had done beforehand, before deciding to go online. So that was useful to be slightly later than some of the other conferences. We had 200 registered participants from all over the world. And we also live streamed some content for which we had thousands of viewers. So that was quite different numbers according to whether we had registered or just passive viewers. Perhaps slightly differently. I mean, in July, I was able to get into my university and we were able to actually use university rooms. We weren't completely locked down, although there was strict control about how many people were allowed in each room and that sort of thing. So yeah, obviously we'll be talking more in detail about this as we move on.
Great, Henry.
My turn.
And Susan, your turn.
My name is Susan Nacy, and I work at Inland Norway University of Applied Sciences together with Ingeborg, who is in the next office right behind me. I organized the 13th conference, for the Association of Researching and Applying Metaphor. It was due to take place in Hamar, Norway in June, and I made a decision in April to go digital. It was a 4-day conference. We had expected 150 participants to actually come to Norway, which is a high-cost country. I hoped for more, but I didn't expect more. For the digital conference, we ended up having 300 delegates from all over the world and time zones all over the world. So we'll discuss more about that in just a moment.
Thank you, Susan. And I just have to say, thank you, Susan, for taking this initiative for this webinar, how to learn from each other and different experiences. So, should we start then on the first main theme, practicalities? How do we actually organize such a virtual conference? And without getting too technical and not too detailed about the technical stuff, I'm sure many people wonder, how much technical support did you require? Did you have a local organizing committee? How did you do this? Anyone who wants to start? Susan, please.
Yeah, I can start. I know we all have a lot to say about this. In my case, it was pretty much a one-man show. So you don't need a huge technical team behind you. We have an ICT department, of course, who could help me, but I didn't need it. We used Zoom. Basically, all we needed was one person to organize. And then during the actual conference, of course, we needed more people to be hosts of these different Zoom rooms. But if you have at least one person who has some ability to organize, it should be fine. I'll let the others go too. I know that they have lots to add.
Okay. Anyone who wants to follow up? Bodo?
Yeah, so I was going to say that we, while I think it's definitely the case that you can only be one person and run an amazing digital conference, we were lucky that we were helped by an events management team. So we were in that fortunate position to actually have a professional events management team help us out. And so that we could then focus on the academic content. And one of the nice things about that is that the events management team was actually quite innovative in some of the social events and some of the getting a conference app for us, and therefore sort of helping us to push probably further than what we would have done if it was just the academics organizing this. But I really just want to say that even with this help, we would have also been able to do this ourselves, just maybe not with all these fancy add-ons that we had.
Thank you. Beatrix?
So we had a conference management team behind, but that was actually to organize a physical conference. So when we decided to go digital, we were just 5 of us. So a team of 5 with only one person, really very much a techie person in that sense, knowing what chat platform to use, where to put all the videos and so on. So we installed different platforms. So we were a very tiny little team, and that team never met because we were all at different cities, located at different cities. So the entire conference was just organized online. Quite an astonishing experience, but yeah, it worked.
Thank you, Beatrice. Susan, you had a comment.
Yeah, first of all, we seem to have lost Charlotte, but I'm looking for her, so I hope that she will soon return. I would just like to add that when I was thinking about making the transition to digital, my first thought was, I can't do that. I'd never been on Zoom before. I didn't know what it was, but canceling was simply not an option because you have to disseminate research, and postponing, we had everything set up. We had a conference set up, and I couldn't, to be honest, I couldn't bear the thought of postponing again. So you don't need to be a magical technical wizard to do this.
Good to hear. Henry?
Yeah, I mean, that's really important. I think we're all going to say that in actual fact. Basically, just being alone, you could probably do most of the work. I was just looking at one of the questions. Somebody said, what platforms other than Zoom did you use? And I think there's probably issues there. I mean, if you want to use different platforms, different sort of things. I mean, I actually had a chappie at the university who was able to just help us through using a particular software for doing live stream, that sort of thing. where the Zoom goes into a live stream and you can input other things into it. But I mean, without him, we would have done things perhaps differently, but that's just one technical support person. The rest, it was basically me with a couple of colleagues. So that's, I think that's quite important to stress that. And using basically, yeah, I mean, somebody pointed out to me, and that was quite interesting. Somebody said, listen, we've all, because of the lockdown, we've all been teaching using Zoom. In actual fact, we're all quite happy about using Zoom. Yeah. So it was nice to have that sort of confidence in the participants that they were using something that they actually knew how to use for once.
Thank you, Henry. And Charlotte, what are your experiences regarding practicalities in organizing such a conference?
I think the main thing is that I didn't have any support, and I would say, as I think others have said, but I lost my connection, of course, was that you don't need a huge amount of support to do it in a low-tech way. I mean, we had zero support from the university, so it had to be low-tech. So we went for the decision to have all of the talks pre-recorded, so we didn't need a tech support team available to manage those sorts of issues. And then what was live was the discussions. So basically we had Zoom and we had a WordPress website, which is where we hosted all the videos. So it was, I think, as low tech as it could be, and it's certainly something that other people could replicate. All you need is to be able to cover the costs of the extra Zoom licenses and the extra storage for WordPress.
Thank you. What are your experience? How did you do it? Did you record anything versus having live sessions? You mentioned it, Charlotte, but some of the others. Oh, you want to say something else, Charlotte, about that, recording versus live sessions?
Well, as I said, we recorded all of the talks, and then we made all of the papers available 24 hours before the discussion sessions, which they fed into. And then the plenaries we pre-recorded, but we broadcast them live through Zoom. So there was a chance for the delegates to all come together at one point, but without those additional worries of what happens if there are technical issues with it. I have to say I liked the pre-recorded format. I thought there were a lot of advantages to it. It gave people the chance to think about how they were going to present their work in a different way, but also it gave the delegates a chance to reflect on it before moving into the discussion. So for me, that distance between getting the information about the paper and then talking about it actually really helped the discussions develop. In hindsight, 24 hours was not enough. What I had in mind was that people would watch the videos in a sequence as if they were at a conference, and that's not what happened. Because the videos were available, everybody wanted to watch everything. And so actually I think a week in advance would have been a more realistic kind of format. But it's kind of trying to balance that. You want the sort of momentum of the live conference, but you also want people to have the chance to do everything they want to do. So that would be my kind of caution, I think.
Any comments or reflections upon this theme? Henry?
Yeah, I thoroughly agree with what Charlotte said. I mean, the pre-recorded papers thing, I think brings, I don't know, the papers actually, a lot of people commented on the quality of the papers. That in actual fact, people had, they'd taken time to perhaps re-record, record, so there's perhaps a sort of a nice qualitative side to that. And we actually had ours available 5 days before the sort of the main conferencing days, just because we realized that people really wanted to, and people did, they sort of watched everything, which was good. However, for the plenaries, they were kept as they was the sort of the surprises. People didn't, the plenaries, although they were pre-recorded, they weren't available. And they were only streamed at given times as a way of just bringing everybody together. Yeah, I'm sure there's lots of different ways of doing it, but I think that the pre-recorded, in fact, actually thinking about it, were I to organize a physical conference now, I would probably be tempted by pre-recorded material, that they would upload a pre-recorded presentation, and then the physical conference would actually be talking about the presentation that's been done online, for example. That would be an interesting evolution.
So Bodo, you have a comment, and then Susan after that.
Yeah, so we went down a different route than Charlotte and Henry did, which is we decided that we're going to go fully live. And the idea was to sort of recreate a live experience. And this was also actually inspired by Susan. But we were thinking that in terms, of course, certain people won't be able to be presenting live because they're in a different time zone, or because maybe they have childcare duties or all sorts of other things. So we gave people the option of doing a pre-recorded talk. So we basically said, we strongly recommend you to present live, but you can also do a pre-recorded talk, which then only about 5% or so of all participants chose that option. And I can say that from having seen both presentations, we don't have the statistics for that yet, but it seems to be the case that the live presentations were on average more attended than the non-live presentations. And I do think there's something about just this sort of immediacy, that you know that somebody is there talking to you right away, that to me feels very different when somebody is putting, when I'm watching a video as a presentation. So I personally preferred this approach, which has some disadvantages when it comes to time zones and these sorts of things, of course.
Yeah, as Bodo said, we too went, we went a hybrid route. All of our papers were live, so there were 20 minutes of paper presentation followed by live questioning, also in chat. So that was lovely to have the spoken and the written discourse at the same time as we are having now. In addition, we did have some recorded sessions. The posters were recorded in advance. We asked poster presenters to have their poster and make a 3-minute video talking about it. And the works in progress papers were also pre-recorded. And we put those on a wall on a site called Padlet. And on Padlet, they could post their videos. They're still there, and people can comment. So in that way, the poster presenters and work in progress presenters got written feedback. Everyone else was live. The keynote speakers were live, and we had very few technical difficulties. And that's a topic we might be getting into later, but it worked really well. You really got the feeling you were at a conference, and that conference was in Hamar, Norway. So that was lovely to get that feeling.
Beatrice.
Yeah, so we tried to make sure at the very beginning of this kind of experience, you know, that we just didn't translate, you know, the physical conference to a new kind of setting, and that the default was always the physical, so that we should just clone whatever there was in a physical conference. But we tried to make it more of a transformation and use the advantages, let's say, of the online space. So we had asynchronous and synchronous live events. The live events were the plenaries. Of course, one of the 5 plenaries was pre-recorded, but we still met and then discussed it. For the paper presentations, poster presentations, they were pre-recorded. And yeah, people were fantastic, you know, what they did and how creative they became. And with that, they also had ways to discuss what they had seen. And we also used the Slack space where we would discuss, we had different channels for the different plenaries as well. And that was, at least during the conference, people were very active, asking questions to Doug Biber and so on, and to Miriam Meyerhoff. And then these were answered. So that was actually that went really well. And you, at least for the plenaries, you also had this live feeling, which I think is very important for online conferences. But I don't think that has to be the only way of doing it. I think we also did an evaluation of the hybrid format, or of the formats we chose, and most of the participants said they loved the sort of mix of recorded presentations and live events. So that's perhaps, and we wrote everything down, so I'll send the link of a pre-paper preprint we have produced, so that you can have a look at that.
Great, thank you, Beatrice. As you can see, the chat is very much alive. Many questions here. One of the questions popping up here is about time zones. How did you tackle time zones? And did you have any scheduling challenges? Susan?
Because we decided to have live papers, we had to deal with time zones. We had delegates as far west from here as California and as far east as Sydney, Australia. Lots of delegates from Hong Kong, China, lots in Europe, of course, Brazil, the United States, Canada, etc. So we decided to stretch the day. We started at 8 a.m. and continued until 10 p.m. in our time zone. So I had lots of volunteers, including Ingeborg here, who hosted Zoom meetings. In the mornings, Europeans could meet anytime. People in Asia could have sessions in the mornings, and people in North America in the evenings, and that worked well. In the middle of the day, around 3 o'clock, that was what I call our sweet spot. That's when we had our keynotes, because then it's 6 a.m. in California and 11 p.m. in Sydney, Australia, if I'm not wrong. I don't think I am wrong. So we had all the plenaries around that time, and that worked well. And then for scheduling was a bit complex because we had to schedule by theme and time zone. And in cases of conflict, time zone trumped theme. But it worked surprisingly well.
Great. A comment from Bodo?
Yeah, so we, upon a registration, we asked people which time zone they're in, so that we could basically also do what Susan did to accommodate the requests. But I just wanted to mention one thing, that we had this conference app, which was called Hoover, and that allows you to make a schedule where you then actually have a schedule for your day that is self-selected with all the parallel sessions, and you then have the Zoom links integrated in there. And this connects to the time zone issue, because a lot of people were in different time zones, and they were happy that Hoover automatically actually adapts to your time zone and presents you the times that are for wherever you are at. And so it made it actually really easy for participants to schedule their day without having to continuously translate the times. But yeah, because we're live, we would also have to adapt and make sure that the speakers were always presenting at a time that they were available.
Henry, you had a comment to this?
Yeah, it's funny that, I mean, time zones was probably one of the things that we just didn't realize was going to be an issue. Rather strangely, perhaps. But we sort of, well, we tried to work both ways. It's an interesting sort of compromise. While we wanted to sort of impose our time zone on others, and we got some very good feedback about that. People felt they'd actually been to France. We sort of, you know, we actually had breakfast in front of everybody, eating a croissant. It was 8 o'clock in the morning for us, but it, you know, sort of might have been in the evening or afternoon at other places. It was a sort of a strange sort of imposing our time zone and our sort of lifestyle upon others in a sort of a strange sort of way, just to make it feel a bit sort of, you know, as though people are actually being there. But at the same time, things like roundtable discussions, if I were to do it again, I think I would really sort of look to do sort of regional panels, a bit like Bodo's just said. I mean, obviously we didn't have any software to do this, just so that, you know, just make it easier for, you know, for people, you know, if there was an Asia panel, then that could take place at a time that really suits them. And because it's recorded, it's, you know, it can then be free for others. So there's this sort of a compromise is probably quite a good thing, I would say.
Good idea.
Yeah.
Did you have a comment, Beatrix?
Yeah, it's same for us. I mean, we also, I guess at the time when we had to decide how we would realize this conference online, we probably weren't as courageous enough. So I would be more in the line of you, Henry. You know, this is what we did as well. So we used more or less our time zones, but tried to make sure that the plenaries were during the evening, so around 5:30, I think. So we sort of, yeah, calculated everything and thought this is a good time for everybody to join. Whether that was, you know, a good idea, well, perhaps there we should have just been more courageous, in the sense as you have described it, Susan, start at 8 and then go through until 10 or something. But it worked, and yeah, people liked it. So we could have a digital conference dinner, since we talked about social events as well, where at least we had a drink together and cheered. You know, so that was good. And in that sense, we cloned some of the events we would have had then in Heidelberg. But yeah, I mean, that is an issue. I guess that's the only issue of organizing online events, the time zones. But yeah.
Did comment from Susan?
Just time zones is, of course, a complicating factor, challenge, but lots of other things in organizing digital conferences are a lot easier. You don't have to make details about coffee breaks and hotels and all of this. So had I just organized a digital conference and not first done all the physical stuff, life would have been so much easier, I feel.
Bodo.
Yeah, can I chime in on this? So I think, Beatrix, you are totally right, which is that you mentioned the time zone is a big issue and that many things are more accessible, but since you said it was the only issue, I think it's very important to mention, as we have sign language interpreters here, that they are really important to figure out with respect to how to make virtual conferences more accessible. And I think they are actually, things have gotten a little bit harder because in the past, the physical event is organized with a lot of time in advance, and people make decisions about whether they should go long before they go. And so if there's a deaf delegate, they can contact the conference organizers, and there's a lot of time to set things up. And in the sort of digital market space of conferences, people can make a click right away, and then it's not necessarily as easy to organize sign language interpreting and accessibility. So one of the things I think that we need to change as we move forward is to think more about how we can go live, if we want to go live, while also making sure that there's some sort of live captioning system or some other way of interpreting on top of that, to make it really accessible for everybody.
Before we leave the practicalities theme, did any one of you experience any technical problems worth mentioning, sharing?
Yes.
Okay, Beatrix, you go.
Well, I wasn't aware of that, luckily enough. I was texted in between, could you stop talking? Could you stop talking? But I ignored that message I got from my colleagues. When we did the panel discussion, the live panel discussion, which was at YouTube, and then also we said we would record this, but the channel then didn't work at first. But I was talking and talking, and I didn't see that something was happening. But luckily enough, we had a second backup recording of that, so we could use this. So that was a huge issue, which I just was totally not aware of. That was kind of interesting, and I just thought, just continue, ignore your messages you get. And yeah, so we had some issues, and of course I know that some couldn't use Zoom, or the internet connection wasn't strong enough, but then you just log back on, and I could feel on the second day we were just more relaxed, and we thought, well, these things happen, so just keep going. And yeah, we're just happy that we could have this event.
Great. Henry, you had experienced some technical problems.
Yeah, I'd actually given some advice about what would happen if things went wrong. I basically said that, if everything goes crash, first of all, go to the website, then check your email in that order. It just so happened that in the middle of our quiz, well, no, just before the quiz started, the whole system just sort of folded, crashed, and we had to restart the computer and what have you that was planning. And it actually, it sort of worked okay. We got the information up on the website, an email went out, and it was sort of, life came back. It was fine, but I'm glad that I'd made that announcement. I sort of thought about, this is what you need to do, because you can't answer everybody's emails at once. So you look here, you'll find the information, and so we just sorted it out.
Thank you. Any last comments from Bodo?
Yeah, so I also just wanted to say that we ran into a big technical issue. Where we had these 10 parallel sessions set up, and then all of a sudden all of the Zoom rooms crashed. That was quite horrible for us from the conference organizer side, because it's like literally like seeing like your conference burn almost for a few minutes. What the issue that we ran into was a surprising one, that even though we trialed things before. It was hard to anticipate this, which is we set, so when you have a Zoom room, then of course you have a host, and we also set up co-hosts. And the idea there was that the co-host was supposed to be a sort of robustness, just in case the host doesn't show up, then we have the co-host. And the issue was that the co-hosts that we set up, their licenses had changed in the meantime because the university IT department has done something behind the scenes. And then all of a sudden, whenever one of the co-hosts was entering any of the rooms, all of the rooms would simultaneously crash. So that was just complete craziness. And then we actually had to very quickly set up new Zoom rooms. But it worked within the span of 10 minutes. And then after that, we sailed through smoothly. What I would say as a learning, for me, like the learning opportunity there was to make sure that if you are using your university's license for Zoom, or any piece of software, that you may have an absolute direct line of communication to your IT department, and that you're making sure that they're not changing anything behind the scenes that they haven't told you about, which in big institutions, IT departments like to do. So just make sure that you have somebody that you can directly talk to.
Thank you for sharing. Now we move to another theme, more about social and networking events. How do we make interaction happen? Any experiences on that? Charlotte?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really difficult area to address, because what you're trying to replicate a lot of the time are those kind of informal and unplanned interactions. You know, it's the conversation you have with somebody while you're queuing for coffee, or the conversation you have when you're sitting next to someone you don't know in a conference, and then that, you know, starts off some kind of discussion about areas of shared interest. And it's really difficult to replicate that with planned interactions, which risk leaving everybody feeling slightly awkward and not at ease, not replicating that level of interaction. So for me, that's a really big area to think about for future conferences, of how you replicate that. What we had in practice for our conference, we had a student researcher hangout, which was open for the whole morning on the 3 conferences. And we had a nominated student researcher who was kind of not the host, but just went and opened the room and was there. That worked really well, and they've continued that. That's now sort of a regular group who are meeting up and talking about their research. We had a pub quiz, which was amazing, which I did not organise at all. I take no credit for it. That was really nice. That worked very well as a social event, and people worked in teams. And I think that's really important, that if you want people to try and interact with people they don't know, they need a shared task. The shared tasks, I think, are really key to getting some interaction going. And then because people asked for it, we also had a coffee break, and that didn't work. It was just a room, people went in, there was nobody there, so they went out again. And unless, you know, all the people went in at the same time, it just didn't really work so well. Where there was a lot of interaction going on that wasn't necessarily directly to people who were presenting was in the chat, very much, people talking to each other in the chat, and Twitter. There was an awful lot of extra discussion going on Twitter. So there was lots of interaction, but there's a lot more I think we could be doing with trying to set up those sorts of interactions.
Susan?
We had coffee breaks that were very successful. And the way we did is the way you will experience after this webinar, that we set up a session, a Zoom meeting, and then we had what was called a Meet the Expert session, where we had agreed with 2 of the 4 keynote speakers that they will definitely be there. If you want to talk to Bodo Winter, then meet him at 4 p.m. And if you want to talk to Beatrix, she'll be there too. And we sent each expert out into a breakout room. And then people come to talk to them. They could just listen if they wanted to. It was very good for early career researchers who didn't dare to talk to the big experts, but they really wanted to, because they got the chance to really be a wallflower, to eavesdrop, whereas at a physical conference, it's not polite to eavesdrop. Here it was quite different. And people showed up at these. They were very popular, and in the end, people started organizing with each other, that Charlotte, I'd like to talk to you. Why don't we meet here, and they can, and ask them to send us into a breakout room. So that was one way of organizing social events. We were very careful about doing that. Another thing we did, we also had a quiz. We had a in breakout rooms with random groups, and we had digital concerts so that they could get a taste of Norwegian folk music. So that was broadcast live from a farm in the middle of nowhere/Norway. And we had some other similar events.
Great. Henry? You wanted to say something?
Yeah, I was just trying to answer something in the chat at the same time. I can't read, think, and write all at the same time. Sorry. Yeah, I'm talking about the social events. We tried to make sure we had something every day, so there was sort of, so we could just have like an ongoing sort of buzz feeling, you know. And I kept sort of slipping into the chat, you know, sort of, you know, the questions on this might come up in tonight's quiz and things like that, just to create a sense of, you know, sort of, woo, something exciting is going to happen. Although it probably wasn't very exciting when it did actually happen. And what Susan just said, I mean, the whole idea of like a concert, something sort of live and just sort of, you know, just unexpected in a conference was actually really quite good. We had a pole dance display. It wasn't live, unfortunately. We couldn't do it live, but it was sort of, everybody spoke about it afterwards. You know, it was just not expected to happen like that. One of my colleagues actually dressed up with the conference t-shirt on and did a pole dance demonstration. And I took everybody for a cycle ride with a GoPro and went snorkeling semi-live. It was live via Twitter, and then there was like a film. But there was enough sort of, you know, talking about it during the day so that people sort of were just sort of expecting it to happen. It sort of created a sort of a sense of togetherness that accompanied the actual, you know, more formal side of the conference, I think, quite well. That was quite good.
Great. So a comment from Beatrix and then Charlotte.
Yeah, I mean, in a similar way, we had, of course, the mail's Twitter, Slack, where people could team up as well and you know, just talk or chat a little bit. Then we tried to imitate the reception, which originally was going to take place at the Bel Etage at Heidelberg University, but that couldn't take place. So we all asked people, could you please get a drink? And then we cheered to each other. That was nice. And afterwards we moved people to breakout rooms randomly. So they were forced to talk, but that went well in some occasions, I heard, and in others they were like, oh, you know, do we really like this? Of course, people could disappear as quickly as they could in physical conferences as well. So by just leaving Zoom. We also had a quiz, and with that quiz before we had recorded a city tour of Heidelberg, and then, you know, our delegates had to answer questions, and then of course there was a winner and so on. That went much better on the second day and was much more interactive, we thought. And of course, yeah, people joined up randomly as well, or said, yeah, please, can we get together? And they organized also through their own licenses they met up as well. So that's what we found out. But I think with hindsight as well, there, as you were saying, Charlotte, there are options, and I think we have to think hard about these socializing events.
Thank you. Charlotte?
Just a very minor point. I should say, I think these are also issues for, you know, physical conferences, to be honest, that for somebody who goes to a conference without a network, there's quite intimidating places, you know, whether they're, you know, face-to-face, physical or online. So I don't think it's something that's only applying to the online conference. I think we do need to rethink how we bring people in. And as I think Susan was saying, especially early career researchers.
Good point. Did you have any comment to this, Bodo? Or
Yeah, so I mean, I totally agree with what Charlotte and Beatrix and Susan have said about random breakout rooms. I think sort of facilitating serendipitous discovery, that's really the important thing. But just one thing that we did, because we made this decision early on to have this Hoover conference app that we used, one of the things that this allows is that it allows participants to create their own discussion forums. We had some discussion forums that we sort of jump-started or seeded. One of those was Ask a Senior Academic, and actually that was the one that ended up having the longest discussions, and a lot of different people chimed in, and it was quite lively. And I think what's nice about this is that chats and these discussion forums, they sort of lower the bar, in particular for junior researchers who don't necessarily feel confident at a conference to necessarily raise their hand and then speak in front of everybody, but in these sorts of more informal digital spaces, that creates opportunities to then have discussions in a digital space then. And we use this conference app for that.
Mm-hmm.
What was the feedback from conference delegates and participants?
Mm-hmm.
Susan?
We had 300 conference delegates and 156 of them filled out our post-conference evaluation. So we got all sorts of interesting information. Some of it is summarized on a blog online, so check out our resource section. So what they said about the advantages of digital conferences has been summarized in the blog that I wrote. They were able to they said that this was important for their professional network, and that was part of the goal that I had, especially, although not just for early career researchers. So Bodo's point is very important, that I found that ECRs, they dared to say stuff. They would write stuff in chat, even though they were new to the field of metaphor. They still, they felt comfortable enough writing things and contributing with their points. So that was very giving for us. We were very pleased about that.
Mm-hmm.
Beatrix?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the reasons why we also decided to have this conference online was because we especially wanted to support early career researchers, because for them it's important. I now noticed the same thing as you've just said, Susan, and also Bodo, that it was easy for them in that sense, or perhaps easier to communicate, in different ways via the Slack channel and so on and so on. And I think that's just wonderful and very, very good. And yeah, perhaps one other thing I wanted to mention is that, of course, with regard to the organization of these socializing events, you have to tell people in advance what they expect. That was also a feedback we got. They said, well, you just said there's a reception, so we didn't know what to expect. Tell us next time, we're having a drink, or we're doing this, or you will be having a quiz. People want to know what to expect. And this was something we hadn't thought about, and probably, yeah, because actually, since everything was so tight with regard to the organization, that wasn't something we didn't do because of time constraints, but that was the feedback we got. Let us know what you do.
Mm-hmm. Henry?
Yeah, concerning feedback, I mean, I got the impression that lots of the feedback, when you look at it, you just realize that just people are just so very different. Some people twig straight away, and they really, they really work out. They can sort of just see how things are working, and they, you almost don't need to tell them exactly how it, and some people just really need all the information. And so sometimes it was hard to sort of pitch it right. So I was just, it's interesting what Beatrix was saying, that people need to know exactly how things are going to happen, but other people just sort of pick it up and they're quite happy to go with the flow. But in terms of feedback, one of the very positive areas that were commented on, that we got, was that people felt that it was very important that they sort of felt they'd actually been there. They hadn't just sort of gone online and, yet another meeting online, that they'd actually sort of been to a conference. And I think that was something that came out, that, they felt that was important, and it came out positively, that we got certain things right, other things wrong, people pointed out, but that was a very important thing. They'd actually felt they'd been to a conference.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Perhaps just to pick up on what you've just said, I mean, with this rapid transformation we are currently experiencing, so when we did the conference, people were used to this kind of style of communication and so on, but perhaps not as much as we are now. So in that sense, I guess we had more of the delegates who said, please tell us what to expect, what to do, and how to do this. And I think that's perhaps human to want to know this in that sense. But I notice now that I wouldn't say we are more easygoing, but we are more used to this. And perhaps that's also why we at some point weren't as courageous, or just said, oh, that's enough. People might be overburdened. They might be tired after a whole day of watching this and that and so on. And I think, that attitude, at least, or what to expect, and the knowledge of what to expect is different now, and that's rapid. It's just, I mean, May is not that long ago. So I think whoever is going to organize a conference online can use this now, this experience.
It's good to hear. Charlotte?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. I think one is it's difficult in a way to take away the feedback from these conferences to a conference which has been planned to be delivered online. So I would say the feedback was astonishingly positive, but a lot of that was a response to the fact that, you know, we'd gone ahead with the conference, everybody had really worked together, delegates, organisers, and it was a real collective effort. And one of the reasons we went ahead with it was because we really wanted to bring a little bit of normality back to this incredibly uncomfortable and strange time. So for a lot of us, it was the most social interaction we'd had in months. You know, it was, we had a extra panel on discourses of COVID. So it gave people a chance to sort of think about this with the distance of doing it from an academic perspective, and people really welcomed that. I think we're going to talk about future things later, but I do think there will be a difference between the way that people responded to these improvised online conferences versus a planned to be online conference. But one, in terms of specific feedback, one thing that people commented on quite a lot was the fact that we really emphasised we weren't expecting people to be able to be participating in perfect working conditions. So, you know, that we knew that there would be background noises and children coming in and cats coming in, and that was what we were expecting. This was not going to be an unusual kind of event. And I mean, that probably is something we need for future conferences as well, because if people are participating virtually, they won't have perfect access, and if the connection fails, it's fine, you know, we'll get it up again and it'll work. So that's one of the specific elements I think to think about.
And thank you, Charlotte. That was a perfect cue to the last main theme about the future. Based on your experiences now so far, what would you like to see in the future regarding online conferences? Bodo.
So yeah, I by the way just wanted to, I mean, it's a nice segue, as I said, Charlotte, and I really think that one of the, so this generation of conferences, of course, has a sort of compassion cushion, because we were all sort of in this situation together, and moving forward to the next generation, people are going to be more critical of virtual conferences, and they're going to be more critical of technical issues and so on, I think. And so what I was going to say, this is relates to one of the points that Beatrix made, which I think is really important, is that this generation of conferences is very much physical conferences cloned into the digital space. And I think what we should be thinking about more as a community is sort of how we can totally rethink that space, and whether all of the things that we have had in physical conference, do we actually need them? So currently our discussion was very much focused on trying to recreate that experience. And so I saw in the chat a comment on poster sessions, for example, and I would wager that perhaps we don't need poster sessions anymore in a digital space. At least you now have the option of organizing a conference without this. And so I think sort of trying to remove yourself conceptually from the physical conference is a thing that will be useful for us moving forward.
Want to comment on that, Beatrice?
Yeah, to follow up on this, for me, it has to be a totally, as I said, totally new transformation, and as I said, not a translation. And with that, we can also be freer, you know, we can also be creative in how we do this, and also take account of what people's needs are. On the other hand, I just saw a comment on the chat that some delegates had already said they can't attend full time as they can't cancel classes for a virtual event. Well, this is now the other bit, that of course virtual events count in the same way as others do, as going to a conference. Also, I think funding agencies now have to revise their guidelines of what they fund and what they don't, and we have to work with them to figure out, you know, how, if we are going to organize one, how can we you know, be supported. The DFG, the German Research Foundation, was very flexible and very supportive, but they also said, well, we haven't been, you know, faced with this challenge now, so we have to revise our regulations as well. And I think perhaps we can also think about formats now that might count in the same way. And I think that's something we have to discuss anyway, as peer-reviewed presentations in that sense, which have a value in themselves as well. How do we present? What do we present? You know, what's the standard? And what are the norms we want to set up? And who is going to set them up? I think with that, we can so much profit from the next generation, which will be the future generation, that I just like to really work with them on what to expect and how to do this. And I mean, in addition, all those conferences, and people have said this, in terms of sustainability, who can participate, diversity, equity, and so on. These are huge chances with regard to what, the challenges this world is facing. And I think let's just be very courageous and address these issues and make the most of it. And then we can also have hybrid conferences, but just, I mean, the costs and so on, there is an issue there. Despite the fact that I love to see my colleagues in person, I have to say as well. But I think you know what I mean.
These are really great points, Beatrice. You want to follow up on that, Henry?
Yeah, I just want to follow up on that. That's really, really useful information coming out of what you just said, Beatrix. There is something that's quite important, perhaps, in making certain things work in a way, and that is if you have a conference that's very much a sort of a recognized sort of, I was going to say, an association or community that feels the need to come together, then they might be willing to sort of, you know, make sure that they're not just dipping in and out and, you know, in a very strange way, that they're going to commit time to being online together in a way that perhaps sort of maybe a general or other conferences might not be able to do. I got the sense that with TALC, there was a community of people that, you know, were used to coming together every 2 years, and even if they had teaching, you know, they were going to be there. So I wonder, I should imagine it really does depend on the type of conference that's being organized as to how that would actually be able to hang together, and the use of time, and, you know, how innovative you can be would really depend on this need of a sense of community, which is obviously, you know, goes back to the days when everybody used to see each other on a regular basis and, you know, share actual time together.
So Charlotte, you'll have the last comment on this theme.
I mean, things for the future, it sort of crosses over into things I know we're going to talk about later on, but I mean, I absolutely agree with what others have said. I mean, what I'd like to see is a real rethinking of the conference, both as an online, as a hybrid, as a physical event, let's say. So very much moving away from this idea of adapting to it, but, you know, really rethinking what are the things we value in conferences. And from this conference, what I would take away is really things that I really value are the really high quality discussions that bring people together, and, you know, trying to move away from the one-to-many interactions. So if I give a paper, you ask me a question, and then we finish, and that's it, and we move on. So I'd certainly like to see more of those drawing together themes and group discussions, I think would be really important. Sorry, one other thing I'd say is really trying to maintain what I think has been very positive about these improvised online conferences is the openness and accessibility. And I think something that they did very effectively that people have mentioned before was drawing in early career researchers or just people who are not so confident or don't feel so entitled to participate in those spaces. So the fact that you have the written chat was really valuable. The fact that you don't have all those physical markers of who people are and who knows each other, and those kinds of things disappear. And if we can sort of maintain that flattening of those hierarchies, that would be really valuable for the future.
Thank you, Charlotte. Now, time flies when having fun. We will very soon end this panel discussion and meet again in another Zoom meeting room. But I would really like some concluding remarks from each of you panelists. Your most important points that you want to stress before we go to our Zoom discussion room. Susan.
Well, I think we all have lots of points, so we're very grateful that we can continue this discussion in chat. And I imagine most of us are available for further questions if anybody needs help. All of us have been contacted afterwards. One thing I'd like to to say, which I've mentioned in chat, is that you can preempt problems. We had help sessions, just like we did today, where people who are unsure could come and zoom in and learn how to change their name and learn the difference between gallery view and speaker view, which some of you may or may not know, and could try out their presentation. We wanted to make it accessible to even the so-called dinosaurs who felt very uncomfortable with going online. And we had some wonderful examples of people who had never been online before, myself included, who managed just fine. They presented an international paper at an international conference. And one other point is that it's possible to expand the concept of what a local organizing committee is. I sent out word on Twitter to the Metaphor community saying, I'll do this, but I need your help. I can't do this alone. And so I had volunteers, including 4 PhD students in different countries all over the world, who volunteered to man the help center to help guide people through Zoom. So that was really lovely to take advantage of the community, because it's no longer just the students on your physical campus, for example, who can help you. Lot more to say, but I'll stop now.
Thank you, Susan. Bodo, any concluding remarks?
Yeah, so my concluding remark would be that, first of all, I think these sorts of discussions are really useful, and there needs to be more of this. And I think actually some sort of discussion like that also with the deaf community would be a really important thing to do. Just moving forward to make sure that with the new generation of virtual conferences that we can sort of plan ahead more about how to make them even more accessible to really everybody. And I think having a discussion with the community on those sorts of issues would be really useful. So continuing that, but then also focused on the separate sub-issues that exist within the space.
Great, Bodo. Beatrix, what are your concluding remarks?
I mean, for me, it's just, I'm so glad I did this, and I can just highly recommend to you, just go for it. And don't put yourself under pressure, despite the fact that we talked about a new step towards professionalization. But I think it's worth this. And what I value most is the co-creational effort and the empathy and the way this was received in the community. As a linguist, I have to say that it's our duty as well to work in more detail with the new formats and so on, because there's a lot about communication, about how we do things within the new formats of communication we have. So I think it's a real chance for us to impact even more on what we do for society, for our community, and so on.
Great. Henry, what do you say? Any concluding remarks?
Yeah. I would say that just as, any conference, I mean, the conferences differ quite a lot from one to another, from the place, the organizers, the stuff. I think, that it's important, I think, probably to say that online conferences, I mean, they can be, they could probably, accept the same amount of variation. I think people could be quite, innovative, and basically if they feel they can do such and such, well, they do that, and that's their conference, and that's fine. If other people have got loads of other options or solutions, I think that's fine. I think it's not yet time to try to standardize things too much, I would say. But.
Great. And Charlotte, you'll have the last word here.
I mean, yeah, I'd really like to second that variation in how online conferences are done is good. It's great to see that. We don't want to see a sort of one size fits all, because it would make them much less interesting to participants. So, I mean, to people who are thinking of organising an online conference, I mean, I would say one thing is that don't feel that you've got to do something other people have done. There's no need to follow in a particular format. I would say don't feel that it has to be something really high tech. It doesn't. You can set limits on what you can and can't do depending on the resources that you've got. And bear in mind, you can't do everything. I think expectations are going to be higher for future online conferences because we've all got better at it, we've got more experience, and because they're planned online. But I think it's fine to draw limits and say, we can't do this set of things. This is what this conference is going to be like. And the last thing I say, which sort of goes back to what Susan said, is you really need a team to try and help you work with it. You do for any conference, but especially when it's online and you need to offer all that sort of extra help until people are confident with it. So I think, it was really important for me to have people I worked with.
Thank you so much. And to all of you, thank you so much for sharing your experiences.